There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maritza, and welcome to an. We're starting the day off like this. Welcome to another Foundation Q&A. Today we've got Neil Gyte that's with us. I would just like to welcome everyone that hasn't had an opportunity to be with us live. Um, it is truly a pleasure to have you with us. As we go along, please feel free to leave your comments in our comment sections on all our media platforms, and then Neil can answer it for you as we go along. So today we have Mr. Neil Gyte. So he is an incredible endurance swimmer, athlete, and part of a remarkable team that has accomplished a 22-mile open water swim while fasted. This extraordinary feat is a testimonial of Neil's dedication, mental toughness, and commitment to pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Neil, thank you very much for joining us today. Um, I hope that this will be a very informative Q&A as well for all our endurance athletes, because everybody, it's always the big questions: carbs, no carbs, salt, no salt, all those fun things. So I'm just going to kick it off and ask, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also how did you get into doing what you are currently doing?
Yeah, thank you for hosting. It's an honor, pleasure to be on the podcast and be discussing with this because Professor Noakes has been, one of my heroes for many years. I've followed his work, very closely, which obviously influenced, to some degree, the reasons to do the swim. So, where to start? So I would say it all started with my own health journey. So 10 years ago, I was 260 pounds, 18 stone, and the epitome of unhealth. I couldn't run more than a few hundred meters. And my daughter's christening, trying to kick a football around and, play some football with family. Kids were running circles around me. After a couple of minutes, I had to sit down because I was out of breath. Sport had always been a big part of my, kind of upbringing. And I just thought, how can I be an active father if I can't even kick a football around with some family friends? So that was my motivation to get myself into better shape. And so I just started, running, swimming, cycling, and went down the slippery slope that ended up with me doing ultra endurance events, marathons, and ultimately Ironmans. So as part of that, I was always interested in metabolism and how the body utilizes fuel. I got introduced to kind of ketone low carb pretty early on because as an endurance athlete, trying to optimize and balance those energy sources is really important. So that was, I've done a lot of stuff over the last 10 years, but really over the last 2 years, the impact of chronic disease on family and loved ones, cancer, autoimmune diseases, bipolar, neurological diseases, depression, got me digging much deeper into the root cause of these chronic diseases. And as I realized that the majority of these chronic diseases are, well, all of them are metabolic in nature and down to your mitochondria and your metabolic health, and the vast majority are preventable and reversible. It was kind of this light bulb moment that I thought I was pretty dialed into health and nutrition. Even I didn't realize this. Very few people in the world, realize this. There is an amazing growing movement. And so I, having spent 20 years in the tech industry, 12 at Google, helping to build the Google Maps and Google Earth business, I decided to set myself a new kind of mission to help 1 billion+ people become metabolically healthy, and dove into the health and wellness world. And so this swim really was part of, a metabolic kind of demonstration challenge to show that sugar and carbohydrates are not needed for athletic endurance endeavors, and therefore that translates into everyday life to make people think a little bit how to balance their energy sources and to get back into metabolic and mitochondrial health.
That is absolutely fantastic. So, as everyone can see on the bottom of our screen, yeah, while we are talking about research and development, we as the Noakes Foundation has a Patreon page, and our mission is to challenge and question the science, as Neil has done now with his fantastic swim that he has done. So, please, ladies and gents, if you have an opportunity, please go and support our Patreon page. It is all for our research and to include swim challenges and things that we cannot finish without having an opportunity to have support by our patrons. So please just have a look there if you can. And then we are going to dive straight in, Neil, to my question number one. How do you prepare for a swim like that? How do you prepare for something that you are now going to, that enormous challenge?
Yeah, good question. So having done a number of, I would say, events and ultra endurance events before, I at least had some base of training and fitness and so forth. That helps significantly. I think the second thing is both my brother and I, as a family, we did a lot of swimming when we were younger. So we were naturally, good swimmers with good technique. Because I'm the first to admit, if you haven't done much swimming, then even trying to jump in and do, a few hundred meters is really challenging. So we had both of those things, I would say, in our favor. But outside of that, this swim challenge was an interesting one because it was, 22 miles, 36 kilometers. Eventually took us just under 12 hours of swimming. And prior to this, the longest I'd swum had been an Ironman swim, which was around, 4 kilometers. So going from 4.2 kilometers up to 36 is a huge jump. And then doing that fasted, all of my Ironmans were done with some fuel. I did a couple of half Ironmans actually fully on a keto diet, but I was still taking MCT oil and coconut oil and some other things as part of that. So yeah, how to train for that? I would say there's two answers to that. Firstly is you've got to make sure that your body is highly efficient at utilizing fat as a fuel source. And that then the best way to do that is to go onto a very low carb diet to, the body is then constantly in that ketogenic kind of fat burning state. So a staple for me the last 3 months was a low carb base. I would cycle in, small amounts of carbs strategically as part of that to not have too much of an impact on hormones, because I think that's an interesting balance we can get into in a bit more detail. So that was a big part of it. And then there's the swim part of it. And that was a mixture of, I did a lot more gym and strength work, especially for my upper body, because most of my, Ironmans, most of the endurance is using your legs to run or cycle. So you do actually very little upper body work as part of that. And the swim is pretty much all upper body work. So I had to do a significant amount of gym work to help with the endurance. And then it's really time in the water, time in the pool. So I would do a mixture of, I'd probably do about 4 swims a week. 3 of those would be shorter, 1 to 2 hours. And they generally would be fasted first thing in the morning. They're pretty short. And then the weekends, I would do my longer swims. And that was building up from, 2, 3 hours up to 5, 6 hours. And I eventually ended up doing it's always good to do one simulation swim as best as you can. So about a month ahead of the swim, I did a 30-kilometer pool swim, which took me about 9.5 hours. So I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, got down to the gym, and didn't get back home until 5 o'clock in the evening. And I actually ended up doing that totally fasted, because I think a lot of people will probably ask, well, how much training did you do fasted versus not? I actually did less than you would think fasted. A lot of the longer sessions I did fuel. But I fueled with healthy fats, with macadamias, with keto bricks, which a great company in the US, Robert Savage and team have created these amazing 1,000 calorie keto bricks that are specifically formulated with kind of minimum natural ingredients that make it really easy to eat. So I did a mixture of fat fueled and fasted training, but that 30K, 9.5 hour swim, I did that totally fasted. And actually felt amazing throughout that, in terms of felt like I was getting stronger throughout the swim. Don't get me wrong, my shoulders and arms were pretty tired as I got to the end of that. But once your body gets into the ketogenic state, it just gets into this beautiful kind of homeostasis where it's like your electric car, but you've got unlimited range. And so you just feel like you can keep going on and going on. You have this kind of unlimited energy source. So I would say that's a high level summary of how I approach the training from it. You just have to break it down, work on the specific components, and then try to bring it all together. And that really gives you the confidence that then on challenge day, that the body can do it. It's about what are the conditions, making sure you're in the right mental state. And a lot of on challenge day is really just the mental challenge of then getting through whatever challenge day throws at you.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'm just quickly going to drop into the comments. Please, everyone that's watching us, you are very welcome to leave a question in the comments and Neil can answer it for you. So we've got Jana saying hi. Wendy's also saying hi, all the way from Canada. Jolani is also saying hi. Jana also asked here, did you take any breaks during the swim? If yes, how often and for how long did you?
Yeah, great question. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Great question, Yana. So yes, did take breaks during the swim. So we decided before we started to stop every hour. For me, just to take on water and electrolytes, and those stops were anywhere between 2 and 4. I think maximum was 4, yeah, 4 or 5 minutes. We did think during the end of the swim, maybe we would need to stop every 30 minutes just to have a bit of break. We didn't need to do that in the end. So yeah, 60 minutes swimming, 2 to 4 minutes water and electrolyte break, and then back swimming again. So, and we ended up finishing in at 11 hours 55 minutes. So yeah, that was so yeah, as short and limited breaks as we could.
Fantastic. So I also have a question because again, this is open water. How did you find the river or the current, and how was the environment that you were in while you were swimming? How did your body handle all that? It's because that water couldn't have been very warm though.
So the main thing was the water temperature. So Loch Lomond, I mean, it's a beautiful lake, beautiful setting. We were blessed with amazing weather in that it was, yeah, just a beautiful day, very low wind. Wind is the main thing, actually, wind and water temperature. So the wind was, it was almost glass flat as we started. I would say one of my favorite parts was that first hour as we were swimming. It was glass flat. You're swimming with your brother. There's the emotional, family connection. You see the sunrise over the mountains, this beautiful orange hue. And obviously you're an hour into it, so you're not, that tired. So that first hour was really, it was magical. The water temperature was cold. So it was 12 degrees Celsius, 54 Fahrenheit. We did have gear on, so we had wetsuits. We had, boots and gloves and mitts and headgear, because trying to do this unfasted, without wetsuit, I think is possible. But I live in Houston, which is not exactly conducive training conditions for doing a cold open water swim. Actually, it was one of the biggest challenges or question marks for me. There's very little open water swimming that you can do around Houston. So pretty much all of my swimming was pool based, and there's a big difference between pool based and open water swimming. But I had done enough open water swimming in the past to be pretty comfortable with that. But the water temperature was cold. I flew across about 6 days ahead of the challenge, and we spent, actually, my brother and I, a couple of days at Loch Lomond just testing out gear, being in the water, connecting with the water and the lake. And so we did try a few different gear kind of optimizations as part of that to help, protect against the cold. Because the one thing, we had a safety crew with us at all time, a great lady called Chris, who runs a company that helped, anyone swim Loch Lomond if they're interested, all the crazy people. And she said the number one reason why people don't make it is because of the cold. And so we really had to protect against that with, with our gear. So yeah, we made sure that you always try and kind of take all of those variables. What can you do within control? So we planned and tested and got our gear set up. So on the day, the cold ended up being not too big a factor, because we thankfully mitigated against that with the gear that we had.
Fantastic. So Neil, from my side, let's get into it. What was the aim of the swim? What was the purpose of you guys taking on such an extreme endurance event, not race?
Yes, exactly. How did it come about, and why did you crazy guys just kind of decide to do this? So I think that there's two answers to that. First, I would say there's my answer, which is really the metabolic demonstration of this, which is why do it fasted? Why, why. So from my perspective, it's to demonstrate, very much in line with, Professor Noakes and a lot of the work of the Noakes Foundation, to demonstrate that sugar and carbohydrates are not needed for athletic endurance endeavors. They're not needed, they're optional. And therefore that translates into everyday life, because a lot of the chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases is being driven by too much carbohydrates in the diet, especially sugar, especially ultra processed food, and overconsumption of a lot of the starchy carbohydrates. Our evolutionary biology is just not designed to constantly be bombarded with huge amounts of carbohydrates and glucose, and that leads to insulin resistance and mitochondrial dysfunction. And for those, I'm sure your listener base are aware of this, but mitochondria are the most important thing in our body. They are the cells that create the energy. Well, they create the energy for every single cell, tissue, and organ in our body. And when they don't have the right energy inputs, they don't work properly. And whenever you have anything which is underpowered and doesn't work properly, it's likely to malfunction. And so that manifests itself in different organs with all of these different diseases. So whilst all these diseases look like they're very different and caused by very different things, they all have the same fundamental root cause. So for me, it was really to raise awareness for metabolic health, metabolic therapy, and that metabolic therapy is being demonstrated to help reverse, prevent the majority of these chronic diseases, as well as other lifestyle interventions. And it's much more in people's control than they think to significantly reduce your chances of getting cancer, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, all of these different diseases. So that was, I would say, my answer. My brother's answer, slightly different. So he, back 5 years ago, was struggling with depression and mental health challenges. As part of that, we were on a family holiday, and I was training for a triathlon at the time, as was my older brother. We went for a swim in the lake where we were on holiday, and we said to my Dave, my younger brother, why don't you come join us for a swim? And he ummed and ahed about it and said, oh, I'm not too sure. I lent him my wetsuit. He ended up going for a swim. And he said it just transformed his mood. So the fog of his depression just lifted, and he felt transformed. And I think it was a mixture of the cold, the exercise, being in nature. And that fog lifted for about 24 hours, and then it descended back in again. But he was looking for tools to help manage his mental health, and this became one of his tools. So it fostered for him a love of outdoor swimming. He then signed up for a 10-kilometer swim in Loch Lomond, and that for him sowed the seed of, one day I want to swim the length of Loch Lomond. So that kind of became just one of his dream swims. So it was always his swim from the start. And then how this, he then at some point asked if I would be interested to join, given I'd done a bunch of ultra endurance things in the past. So we discussed that for a bit. I said I would happy to join as long as it didn't detract from his reasons for doing the swim. And then as we were discussing doing the swim, I was transitioning out of tech into the world of health and wellness. And I said, well, how about we do it with a twist? A small twist ended up being a big twist, which was doing it fasted to demonstrate the metabolic kind of flexibility of the body to be able to utilize as a fat as a fuel source. So that's, I would say, really how the swim came about. And for me, it's part of an ongoing thing. So I've got two things that are really important for me right now. One is my personal mission of helping 1 billion plus people become metabolically healthy. A big part of that is awareness of which challenges like this are purposely a little bit provocative to try and make people sit up and think. So I love Dr. Nick Norwitz. He calls this legit bait, which is, how can somebody swim 12 hours, burn 9,600 calories, without consuming any food? Surely that's not possible, because the current paradigm, is that that's not possible. You need to be having your goo gels and all these things to fuel athletic endeavor. So awareness is a huge part of it. And the other part is then, how do we have practical, natural products that people can really use to help them transition into better metabolic health? So I'm really focused on those two things. So I'll continue to do challenges like this in the future. I've not decided what's next. I did promise my family that I would take some time after this, because there was obviously a significant amount of time invested as part of the training. But yeah, that's really how the swim kind of came to be.
Fantastic. So we've got a lot of new people here. Brendan, he says, afternoon all. Would you apply the same low carb formula to running? a 42 or a 56-kilometer marathon?
Yeah, good question, Brendan. I would say, look, certainly you can. Much of it is down to what you're looking to achieve, through it. So yes, I'm highly confident you could do this sort of approach on any other type of running, cycling, etc., so forth. Because if you're fat adapted, then your body and your muscles just utilize fat as the fuel source. The question which I would actually love to discuss with Professor Noakes and the team is, what do you want to achieve as part of that? And are some carbohydrates needed for optimal performance? I know a lot of the research recently says, I think Professor Noakes would say, no, the body can oxidize fat at high enough rates to actually be able to do a marathon at a high intensity if you are trained and adapted to do that. It is one of the things that I'm considering. So I did chase pretty fast marathon times back before doing the swim. So I think um, I ended up doing something in the region of 2 hours 45, which is pretty decently fast for a marathon. I was largely low carb at the time, but I did fuel for the work required, and I did fuel with carbohydrates on race day. Obviously, this was prior to my kind of metabolic revolution education and wake up. So it's one of the things that I'm considering in the future is, if I do a similar thing, go back to low carb and really train for a marathon, can I get close to that 2:45 sub 3 and do that totally fasted? So yeah, I would say watch this space, but I think you definitely, of course, can run a marathon, and you can do that fasted if you're fat adapted. Absolutely no problem. The body has, anywhere between 50 and 100,000 plus calories of fat. You train it to tap into that fat, then you can keep going and keep going and keep going.
Oh, fantastic. Ian said he recently did 1,000-meter swim in a pool, just slided through the water. Very much fun. So,
Amazing. Well done, Ian. Yeah. And that's the other thing is a lot of people, maybe just to touch on that, when I talk about some of the, endurance endeavors, Ironman or long swims, a lot of people say, yeah, that's crazy. I could never do that. And I remind people that I was 260 pounds and I couldn't run more than a few hundred meters before I started on my journey. So anyone can achieve anything that they want. The question is it important enough for you, whatever that is, to put in the time to get the body, the mind, your nutrition and your fuel source, in the right way. So I was never an endurance athlete, far from it. And it took me many years to get there for sure. But also, you don't have to do crazy endurance things. If you're doing, 1,000 meters, amazing. Just if people move more, if people focus a little bit more on what they put into their bodies, and really, the food and nutrition that you intake builds you from the inside out. You're like a 3D printer, kind of, what goes in the ink cartridge ends up building your bodies. And if people do that and help, reduce stress and manage toxins in the environment, I think everybody can get themselves into better metabolic health and significantly reduce the chances of getting any of the chronic diseases.
fantastic. You did touch something on hormones just now, no, that you said we would like to have a more of a chat on. I don't know if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit around the metabolic and the hormonal and how does it correspond with each other?
Yeah, I would love to. So I had some really great challenge insight partners that very kindly provided me with all sorts of tech and different tests. So I was Levels provided me with a continuous glucose monitor. I had a Keto Mojo device monitoring my blood glucose and ketone levels. I had a Keto Air device, which was kind of a breath test, which detects the acetone, or one of the ketone byproducts in the breath. Cyfox Health gave me some blood test kits that I did, a baseline before, the morning of, the day after the swim, and then a baseline afterwards. And I'm also still waiting for the results. I did a microbiome test before and after to try and learn as much, to your question, kind of what's happening metabolically in the body. Tons of interesting data for that. I think for me, the highlights of that are, firstly, I found my CGM profile to be fascinating. It was kind of what I expected, but with some nuance. So what I expected was, I would start off at my baseline glucose level, I always get a spike when I first start exercising, because I think the body always looks to utilize glucose first, even if you're in a low carb state, because more than a teaspoon of sugar in the bloodstream is toxic. So the body always looks to burn glucose first. When it realizes there's not a huge amount of glucose in the stores, it then switches. So I always get a little bump. I was expecting it then just to gradually drop throughout the swim down to kind of baseline gluconeogenesis levels and sit there. That's what I expected. What I found was actually every time we stopped during the swim was my glucose rate dropped, and especially the second 6 hours. So the second 6 hours, I was down to baseline gluconeogenesis around 55 milligrams per deciliter, which is pretty low. I mean, conventional wisdom would say that is dangerously low. I felt absolutely great throughout. I saw this throughout my training swims. And for me, that's just the amount of glucose that you need. But what fascinated me was it would lock in at 55 every hour whilst I was swimming. But when I stopped for the water and electrolyte breaks, it would drop down to 40. And then it would go back up to 55 when I was swimming. And then it would drop down to 40 and go back up to 55. So I just found that fascinating, that even the body, even in that very low glucose state, the body's still down-regulated and up-regulated back. And I'd love to get some more insights. I'm discussing this with some of my kind of science team and colleagues, is to understand exactly kind of what's going on here. So that I found really fascinating and interesting. I would say the other highlights in terms of blood work and impact on the hormones, obviously my C-reactive protein, which is the marker of inflammation, that significantly increased. So it was almost zero before the swim. It went up to 32.5 after the swim, which is kind of what you would expect, you know, having 12 hours swimming almost non-stop. I think for me, one of the most fascinating things, I was interested in the impact on hormones. And so one of the other backstories to the whole swim was, and we can maybe dig into this on another time on another podcast, but I was recovering from kind of chronically low testosterone levels. So back 6 months ago, for a bunch of different reasons, I actually burnt through a lot of my testosterone, partly transitioning into this new world. I had so much energy. I was waking up at, you know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't sleeping because I had too much energy, excitement. And I thought that would last a few days, and it ended up lasting 2.5 months. Long story short, my testosterone levels, you know, got down to around, 100 level. My free testosterone levels were chronically low as well. So I was trying to recover from that, but fasting and testosterone don't necessarily go too well together in terms of significant amounts of fasting can reduce testosterone. So testosterone during the swim was interesting. It did drop. So my pre-swim levels were up in the region of kind of 3.8 nanograms per milliliter, which is still on the low side because it takes quite a long time to recover. And then the following morning, so in one day, that dropped from 3.84 down to 2.47, which is a pretty significant drop in one day. The follow-up on the September 28th, so this is about a week later, I did a baseline level, having still traveled back and had some stress on the body, but actually my testosterone then went shooting up to 5.28, which is back in kind of I would say the lower end of the healthy zone. So, and that's actually the highest testosterone reading I've had in the last 6 months. And obviously I wasn't swimming and doing exercise afterwards. The body was recovering, but I did find that really interesting, that yes, you did get this significant drop, but I actually got this significant, increase afterwards. And I didn't change anything else. I still kept low carb. I still kept eating, exactly the same as I was, because I wanted to truly eliminate as many variables as I could to really understand what was happening metabolically. The final thing, and then I'll pause because I know that the bunch of questions have come in, was actually not to do with the swim. One of the most interesting insights for me was the impact of stress, travel, and jet lag on the body, which I knew, but the extent of that really came through in some of the blood work that I did before and after the swim. So my fasting insulin level, when I did my 12th of September blood test, this was in Houston, I think it was the day before I flew to the UK, my fasting insulin level was down at 2, which is a super low kind of score, as you would expect, being on a low carbohydrate diet and being very kind of insulin sensitive. On September the 19th, the morning of the swim, so that's, what, 6, 7 days later, my fasting insulin was up at 6.5, which is a significant increase given I
Yes.
didn't change anything. I still kept on a low carb diet. I was still eating, the same foods, but the undercurrent to this was I did an overnight flight to the UK, so I didn't really sleep on the flight. And although I've traveled extensively over the last 20 years and I've always been pretty good at managing jet lag and getting decent sleep whilst traveling for events, for some reason, I think it's because I was in, different Airbnb places, different beds. I had, of the 6 nights I was in the UK, 5 of those, my Garmin sleep score, I looked all of this retrospectively. I wasn't looking at it during the week. My Garmin sleep scores were between, 40 and 55, which is pretty shocking. I think I had one night where I got a decent kind of 76. So I had one night of decent sleep, 5 nights of really, really poor sleep, especially the night before I had a horrible night's sleep. And even just that was enough to increase my fasting insulin levels from 2 up to 6.5. And I would say they've still stayed high since, I think, because of the obviously still kind of the stress nature recovering, after it. So I'm going to do another test actually in the next couple of weeks. And I did actually see all of this reflected in my continuous glucose monitor. So if I look at my average glucose, you know, September 12th, that was around, 85. September 19th, that was up at around 100. So my average glucose was up 15 points. I'm not putting carbohydrates into my body, but still the stress of lack of sleep puts the body into that kind of, self-defense mode where it starts to overcompensate. So yeah, some really interesting insights in a lot of the blood markers. I'm going to do some more videos to summarize the science and put more of this on the website as the results come through. But yeah, I would say they were most of the summary headlines of, some of the insights.
That is very interesting, especially with our own bodies, the fright and flight mode, where your body just goes like, all the stress coming of through and how it adapts or tries to make sure that it doesn't go into any shock of some sort. So it's quite interesting, very interesting. We've got a question here from Dr. Abraham. He's all the way from India. He says, any personal experiences on the possible adverse. Oh shoot! Look at this screen moving by itself. Oh, okay, let me start again. Any personal experiences on the possible adverse effects or performance reduction, illness, or injuries when shifting from a regular high carb to a low carb while you are a keto adapting? I know you overcome them, and how long till you become totally adapted? And carb use how much carbs do you still take during exercise, comparing before to after?
Yeah, so really great question. I think there's two answers. I think you can get fat adapted in a relatively short period of time. A lot of the research that Professor Noakes and the Noakes Foundation and the scientists have done, you can get fat adapted in a relatively short period of time, in the space of, I would say, kind of 1 to 3 weeks. At the same time, there's two levels of fat adaptation as I understand it. One, there is kind of, your body able just to convert fat into ketones to use as a fuel source. There's a second deeper adaptation that I was specifically targeting this one, which is really getting the muscles to change to be, really want to use fat and ketones as the primary fuel source, because they'll always default to kind of glucose carbohydrate as part of our protective mechanism. So that did take, I would say, 2 to 3 months to truly keto adapt kind of all of my muscles. And look, impact in performance and reduction, you definitely do feel an impact as part of that, because your body has to, I mean, Professor Noakes will know way more about this than I do. Your body and muscles have to change physiologically to adapt, kind of receptors, how they use fuel. So during that, there was some swims where you feel like you're not, you kind of, you just have maybe 1 or 2 gears. You can't go through 3, 4, 5 gears as you normally would. That for me probably took maybe a month, 6 weeks. But after that, then you get all of those gears back. And on top of that, you get this feeling that you have this constant kind of energy source. So I would say, to answer this simply, yes, to go to low carb, I think you have to be prepared to take a step back. But then that step back, I think, gives you 2 steps forward. A little bit like zone 2 training. If anybody hasn't done zone 2 training, you then say, okay, well, I'm running slower than I normally did, but you're training your heart rate to be much more efficient at, you know, at kind of at at keeping your body and muscles running. So I think it's similar to that. And how much carb do I still take during exercise now compared to before? So obviously on the swim, I took zero carbs. So 12 hours swimming, 9,632 calories burnt, just water and electrolytes. So from that perspective, I didn't have anything during the swim. During other, I would say, and building up to the swim, I didn't really have any carbs, even when I did my fuel sessions. So if I did fat fuel sessions, I would be eating macadamia nuts or keto bricks, which have that, you know, a few grams of carbs, nothing kind of significant whatsoever. I would have some small amount of carbohydrates tactically after sessions. So things like blackberries, blueberries, you know, vegetables, because the body can create its own glucose, but there can be some negative hormonal impacts of putting too much stress on the body to do that. So I would sometimes add very small amounts, but, you know, my carbs were pretty much every day less than 20 grams of, you know, of carbs per day, because I specifically wanted to keep it very low. And still now, even afterwards, like I've been on a low carb diet, you know, for many years. I'm even more convinced now that low carb is really important. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Fantastic. Wendy asked, what amount slash content slash brand of electrolytes did you use to take every hour during your breaks?
Yeah, good question, Wendy. So I used a mixture of two electrolytes. One is called ELTE, ELTE. Very kind of, you can look it up, you can buy it on Amazon. Super simple. It just has the basic electrolytes with nothing else added, because I wanted obviously no sugars, no sweeteners, no nothing whatsoever. And that is in a liquid form. It just tastes like obviously salt water, because it has, you know, the sodium, potassium, magnesium, all of the electrolytes in. So that I would put in the water. So you kind of dilute it into bottles of water. That was my primary source of water and electrolytes. I then did have some salt stick capsules in case I felt I needed a little bit more electrolytes without taking on water, just to kind of balance the body. And so, yeah, some of the stops I would have just the water-based electrolytes. Some of the others I would take, you know, a couple of the salt stick capsules, which again were just pure electrolytes. So they were the two brands of electrolytes that I used. And again, and the amount, I just followed the guidance of kind of how much you add on the ELTA into, you know, the liters of water. I think I ended up drinking in the region of, I think it's about 7 or 8 liters of water during the swim. So I think I averaged around 500 to 600 milliliters of water per hour throughout the swim. And that felt pretty good. I managed to get into a nice, level of kind of homeostasis where the body was just happy to, you know, burn fat and have enough water and electrolytes.
That is fantastic. Oswald asked here, are you planning any more physical endurance events?
Great
Not
question,
per se.
Oswald. Yes, exactly what. I'm not too sure yet. So I did, promise the family that I would take some time the rest of this year to reinvest, obviously, back in the family, back in other things, and truly rebalance my hormones, because that is being, again, very transparent about all of this, balancing, trying to get my testosterone levels back whilst training for an ultra endurance endeavor fasted is a really tricky balance. And so honestly, as part of that, I did have to, I would say, compromise a little bit on my hormonal health to make sure that I could do the swim, which I don't recommend and is not ideal. But by the time we'd signed up and agreed to the swim, and we got everything booked and the dates locked, I didn't know any of this kind of before. So from that perspective, it's something you have to be wary of. So I'm getting my hormones back in balance, but yes, there will be more challenges, most likely towards the end of next year. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I have had a few ideas, not that I'll share those with my family yet. I promise not to think too much about this, but yeah, there will be more challenges in the future to help raise awareness. So watch this space. I'll share as soon as I've got something new to announce.
That was my next question. Do you feel that you achieved your goal? Have you achieved the goal that you set out for the swim? Proving your research, proving the Noakes Foundation or um, Prof's theory regarding um, your endurance training and the amount of carbs?
Yeah, good question. So I'd say yes, in terms of proving the theory behind it. So that was one of the main parts of it. So yeah, and I think all of my blood work and testing, I think, backs that up, that it didn't have a significant detrimental effect on the body, because that was one of the things I really wanted to understand. Yes, your body can do this, but does it have any significant detrimental effect? I think all of the analysis so far shows not a huge detrimental effect. Even the testosterone, yes, that dropped afterwards, and the C-reactive protein went up, as course, but then a week later, my C-reactive protein was back down at 1, which is normal levels, and my testosterone, was the highest it's been in 6 months. So yes, from that perspective, for me, another big part, which is why thank you for inviting me on the podcast and the platform, is the awareness around it. So I'm really trying to drive as much as awareness I can. And again, it's not to suggest that people do what I do, because it is extreme by design, but I really hope that people get out of this, wow, I don't need to fuel athletic endeavor with sugar and carbohydrates. I can fuel with my own body fat if I teach my body to use my own body fat, and optimizing for my mitochondria, my metabolic health, is going to help prevent me from getting one of these chronic diseases, which impacts every single person on this planet. So it's one of the reasons why I kind of set on this new journey, new mission. Was I probably was on a fast track to developing one of these chronic diseases 10 years ago, when I was, very, very unhealthy at the time. Even though I got myself into better health, the impact of these chronic diseases on family, loved ones, it does affect everyone. I don't think there's anybody listening to this podcast, or anyone in the world, you know, in the Western world, who doesn't know friends, family, loved ones, other ones who are dealing with one of these chronic diseases. And when you realize the vast majority are preventable and reversible with relatively simple lifestyle interventions of thinking about how you fuel your body and lowering your carbohydrate intake in line with kind of our evolutionary biology, of prioritizing sleep, of managing stress, of reducing the amount of toxins and environmental stresses that our bodies are impacted, and move more, then that really is the awareness that I would like to drive, is just for people to think and think and start their own journey about, how can I learn more about how my metabolism and how my mitochondria produce energy? How can I balance that so I'm using a combination of both? And how can I dramatically reduce my chances of developing one of these chronic diseases? So I'm still trying to do that through podcasts, awareness. I'm going to do a short documentary on the swim as well. And so that second part of the reason for doing it is still very much in progress.
Oh, that's fantastic. Wendy asked again, how low carb are you generally? I'm curious about your general food plan. Have you tried carnivore? Do you take any supplements? Any thoughts about creatine?
Great question, Wendy. So how low carb are you generally? I would say over the last 10 years, my default has been low carb in general, but I have fueled for the work required. So I have taken on, carbohydrates and other things as part of, doing Ironmans and other athletic endeavors. The last 6 months, and specifically for this, I have been very low carb. So generally less than 20 grams of carbs per day, most days, but I will cycle in higher carbohydrate days and tactically use a little bit more carbohydrates sometimes after a long training session, to offset any hormonal imbalances and just to help the body recover a little bit quicker. So they're used very tactically and still in small amounts. Um, have I tried carnivore? Yes, I have. I've tried every single nutritional approach. I don't call them diets, because I don't like the word diet, but every single nutritional approach under the sun. I've done anything from, traditional keto to carnivore, even, to vegan. I've done high carb, low carb. And I've done so specifically to try all of these things out and see what the impact is on the body. And so for me personally, carnivore, yeah, I personally enjoy and missed some of the fiber that came with vegetables. So I added kind of vegetables back into my diet. Generally, what works best for me is really low carb Mediterranean. That's what I feel is best. So lots of nice fatty fishes. I'll have meat a couple of times a week. I will still eat vegetables, but largely root vegetables. I'll focus on fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, things like that, really to feed the guts. But the majority of my food is then, the macadamia nuts, your olive oils, putting healthy nuts and seeds. Do I take any supplements? Yes, I do. For me, baseline vitamin D, omega-3s are two of the fundamental things that I think that we're just kind of deficient in. On top of that, I look at my blood labs and I work with a traditional Chinese medicine specialist to take magnesium, zinc, any other things that I'm kind of a little bit deficient in. So I'm a huge proponent, if you can, of doing regular blood labs and making sure whatever your nutritional approach is, that you're kind of that you're optimized from a kind of mineral imbalance perspective. Any thoughts about creatine? So I had not used creatine at all until the start of this year, actually. And for me, it was a big part of getting my testosterone back. Having chased very fast marathon times for the last 3-4 years, I had underinvested in strength training. So as I bulked up for the swim, yes, I did and still use creatine as part of that. And the more I research into it, the more I think it is a very useful supplement that can, I think, kind of really help the body. So I do still create creatine, and I'm still now committed. I still do three, maybe 4 gym sessions, strength sessions a week, because I'm still trying to optimize my testosterone level. And so I do use creatine as part of that.
Fantastic. So from your side, if somebody would like to start becoming an endurance athlete, what is your advice for someone like that? Where do they start? What is the first thing they need to figure out and do before they even think about long distance running or swimming or any part of that?
Yeah, of course. So I think the first thing is the why is always really important, I think. So, why is it, understanding why you want to do something? It can be many different reasons, but I think that's the most important thing. And having the right kind of, motivation behind it or inspiration, I think really helps you through that journey, because it is a difficult journey. As I mentioned itself, I couldn't run more than a few hundred meters at the start of my health journey. And I needed the motivation. For me, it was, being an active father. I needed that so much in that first 6 months, because every morning I would wake up at 6 o'clock. It was one of the other things I promised myself, 6 o'clock in the morning, you get up and you go for a run. Doesn't matter how far you run, just do something. But even getting myself out of bed, you wake up, you're tired. Oh, I don't want to run. It's not fun. It's painful. It's sore. But I had, as soon as I remembered the promise to my daughter, then I would be out of bed and I would be out running, even if it was just, 1 or 2 kilometers. So I think understand where you are, have the right motivation, and then don't try and do too much too soon. Learn to try and enjoy and love whatever it is you're doing first, and then slowly build into it over time. So if you've come from a baseline of zero, like I did, and I didn't say, oh, I wanted to do, an Ironman at the time. I just wanted to be fit and healthy. And then I pulled the thread and I kind of continued on that journey. And I just slowly over time went from longer to longer to longer to longer events. So I would say that's probably, kind of my advice. And I think the biggest 2 things: one, really learn to enjoy and love it, but know that that takes time. I hated running for the first 6 months, like detested it, but it was the only thing that I could do consistently when traveling different countries pretty much every single week. And I then eventually I fell in love with running, even though I don't really have, I would say, a kind of a runner's phenotype of body, or I really learned to love it. I think the second thing is surround yourself with people that are interested in looking to do similar things. And if you can, for me, one of the best investments that I made, but I did this probably after 2 years of being on my own health journey, was investing in a coach. So an amazing guy called Luke Matthews, who runs his own coaching business. I bumped into him when I lived in Dubai, and he's been my coach ever since. And having that other person you share your journey with, that helps you understand your body, pushes you to your limits. You have that accountability. I do think that that's especially if you want to chase, I would say interesting times for half marathon, marathon, or ultra endurance endeavors. I do think that investing in a coach is probably one of the biggest things you can do. One, for your physical and athletic endeavor, but the amount that you learn through yourself by pushing and challenging yourself that actually translates into real life. I've learned so much about myself as a person, and then as a kind of a leader that translate into business, that I think I would highly recommend investing in a coach if you can as well.
Oh, that is fantastic. So we are almost at the end of our live. I would just like to say thank you, everyone, for being on and asking all these fantastic questions. I just want to thank Neil for being with us today. It is absolutely amazing listening to your stories, listening to all the absolute fantastic ideas and all the research material and all the things that you have gotten from this amazing swim. Again, at the Noakes Foundation, we have a Patreon page. I'm just putting it at the bottom there again. Support the Patreon. It will be fantastic so that our mission can continue in questioning the science and showing the endurance that is required for this fantastic swim. I see we've got one more question here. Hello to all from Cortia. I am keto adapted for 6 years now. This is from Susanna, sorry. I am a long distance recreational runner. I am preparing for my first oh yes, today, Neil, today is not my day. Marathon, and investigating what would be the best formula for me in terms of hydration and electrolyte intake. Salt tablets hurts my stomach, and I would like to avoid them. Do you know how to calculate minimum electrolyte intake needed for a 4-hour intense activity / race? I had about 7 to 8 3 to 4 hour trainings in which I used salt tablets. Energy, yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, Susanna, great question. Thanks for that. Lovely to meet you. And yeah, amazing that you're keto adapted for 6 years now and a long distance runner. So congrats on that journey. Look, it's a really good question. I think this is where everyone generally is individual and challenged with marathons. If they have water stations where you can supply your own bottles, then I would consider having a look at the ELTE. We can, I'm sure, link it in the show notes, because that is a kind of a liquid electrolyte you then add to water. So that was the primary one, that I used. That way, I think it's much easier on the stomach. You're not taking, the tablets and so forth. So I would definitely look into that. Look how to calculate minimum electrolyte intake needed, for 4 hours. I think this is where everyone's individual and personal. So I just took kind of the guidance that comes with the product, and I effectively tried that. And then I always try, well, what happens if I take a little bit more? What happens if I take a little bit less? And I just try throughout my training sessions to figure out what's optimal, I would say, for me. But there's also an element of listening to your body as well, which is why I had kind of the two-pronged strategy on the swim. I had my liquid electrolytes, but if I just felt that my body needed a little bit more, I then had, the salt stick caps as kind of an add-on on top of that. So because one of the things I have learned is what you do in training doesn't necessarily translate into challenge day. Like, I was dramatically underslept on challenge day. My body was actually in a different metabolic kind of state on challenge day than it was when I did, all of my training and so forth. So your requirements can change. So that would be what I would recommend. Try and test with that. Have a couple of different strategies and test enough in training that you can go into your event with confidence, but also have, if I need, and especially a little bit more, maybe a combination of both of the liquid electrolytes plus, the cap sticks, so you're not relying on just those. Might help you through the marathon. But no, good luck for that. And yeah, feel free to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn or any of the social channels.
And that would be my next question. Neil, where can we find you? Can you give us a little bit of your social handles? We will also add it into our comments. And then your last thoughts. Any last thoughts that you would like to share with our audience that is watching?
Yeah, thanks. So you can, LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me. So if you just search for Neil Gyte on LinkedIn, that's where I'm most active. I am trying to do more on Instagram. I think that's at Gyte Neil, because Neil Gyte was taken. They're probably the two platforms. I'm building out some more, and I'll put all of the videos and documentaries on YouTube. So you can also look me up on YouTube. They're the main places to find me. And so please connect, and if you've got any other questions or tips and advice or anything like those, yeah, please feel free to drop me a note. I will do my best to respond. Yeah, I would say final thoughts. I think for me it is, hopefully, yeah, I've shared enough that people realize that we don't need sugar and carbohydrates to fuel athletic endeavor. We have this amazing alternative energy path, which is fat as fuel. And everybody should consider in daily life, as well as athletic endeavor, how they optimize to utilize both of those fuel sources, because the more you put carbohydrates and sugar in the body, the less your body is able to use that fat burning pathway, and the quicker you will develop most likely one of the chronic diseases. So I really hope people are curious, they start or continue their metabolic health journey. I also have, so we reference some of this on the swim website, which is 0-2-loman.com. So there you can find, why the swim, many of the charities that were supporting the Noakes Foundation included, and some information. I also have another website, 1bmh.org, which is my 1 billion metabolically healthy, which really is a kind of an index of resources of the very simply, what is metabolic health? Why is it important? What are the different ways you can impact it? And links to a bunch of different resources out there to help nutrition, to help stress, because everybody is different. Everybody wants to start in a different place, and just start with one simple thing. Don't try and change 10 things at once. Just commit to the journey, become CEO of your own health, and commit to a lifelong kind of agreement with yourself that I'm going to figure out what works for me, what works for my energy, and try to optimize your health and your health span, and give you more energy to do the things that you want in life. And so hopefully, yeah, I've inspired a few people to think more about that themselves and to help get themselves into better metabolic health.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Neil, thank you again. It was absolutely amazing having this conversation. I think it is remarkable what you guys have achieved mentally for your brother and physically for yourself. That it takes a lot of guts to get to the glory, but well done on achieving what you set out to achieve. And then from us, the Noakes Foundation, and Neil, we would like to say thank you very much for joining us. And we will see you on Thursday, where we have our own South African carnivore, Kobus Kriel, that will be joining us on our live at 11 a.m. Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Marita.